This series was conceived with the idea that how do we connect a business school is only as good as how the school is connected with you all, the community. Because we represent the community relationship is as good as, can be as good as the business school itself. This is the third presentation for this year of Leaders and Legends. And I can tell you that the success of these first two has been incredible. And this is going to be no exception. Launched in October 1st, or the October of the month. It opened with the engaging presentation by General Cartwright, the Vice Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chief of Staffs. And the last month we had FDIC Chairman Sheila Bair. And her presentation was covered by over 100 media outlets in the United States. Today, we're truly delighted to welcome NASA Administrator Michael Griffin. In fact, it might be more fitting to say that welcome back, Michael. Native of Aberdeen, Maryland, holds 2 degrees from Johns Hopkins University. I always say those who are alumni of a university, the university owns them. A bachelor's degree in physics and a master's degree in applied physics. He's a truly Renaissance man in terms of science and technology and leadership. Before joining NASA in April 2005, he served as the head of the Space Department at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. Michael Griffin has called himself as a simple aerospace engineer from a small town. But that describes his accomplishments too modestly. His 6 advanced degrees include a PhD, an MBA. He has run businesses, taught at universities, authored many technical papers, as well as a textbook on the design of space vehicles. He's also a certified flight instructor. And this year, Time magazine named Michael Griffin one of the top 100 most influential people in the world. As aeronaut Marshall Ivins wrote in Time, a true engineer in the broadest sense, Michael Griffin understands systems, whether they are rockets, satellites, airplanes, or the U.S. Congress. The last one is more important. If you understand U.S. Congress, you deserve a Nobel Prize. Not only can he quote the history of a technical concept, but he can also derive the theory for you. Dr. Griffin, I said to him this morning, Dr. Griffin, he says, simply Mike. Dr. Griffin draws special praise from Marshall Ivins and others to being a change agent at NASA, opening the lines of communication and elevating the sense of mission at America's space agency. Similar course of change and innovation here at the Carey Business School. We seek to transform the way business education is taught by installing an open, humanistic spirit that aims to make business and engines of positive transformation around the globe. That was party propaganda. And Leaders and Legends is an important element of this mission. And we are very, very fortunate to have Michael Griffin with us today to address the need for business practices that are positive and transformative. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Michael Griffin.
Thank you, Dean Gupta, for that nice introduction. I'm not sure I recognized myself, but all the same. I am pleased to be invited back to Johns Hopkins and to the Carey School of Business to talk with you today on the theme of improving government processes. I'm shocked to find that you believe somehow that we're not functioning optimally within the U.S. government today, and that there is some need to examine process improvement. But if I can get over that shock, I might be able to offer a few thoughts. I can't necessarily talk about the entire United States government with any claim of expertise at all. I can talk to you about why running NASA is difficult And that may, for those of you who here with some broader knowledge than I, that may give you some insights that might be applicable across the broader range of the U.S. government, or maybe even your home institutions. So I'll try to talk about what I might know something about, which is things that make running NASA difficult, with the hope that those have a broader extensibility. Now, NASA is in some ways like other government organizations and in some ways different. So let me start out by just highlighting a couple of ways in which we are different, and that certainly add to the challenge in ways that other federal entities might not have. The first of those, of course, is above all else our visibility. NASA lives in a fishbowl, and NASA's senior managers live in a fishbowl. Unlike those who run or have high management positions in much, much, much larger entities. For example, NASA has about 0.5% of the federal budget, about $17.5 billion in annual appropriations. That changes, of course, but in inflation-adjusted dollars, it has been remarkably constant for a couple of decades. A recent poll within the last year or so conducted by Wired magazine, and I don't know what their polling technique was, and I can't cite how statistically valid it may have been, but they came up with the interesting result that the average American thinks we spend just under 25% of the federal budget on NASA. If that were true, then NASA would be comparable to DoD in its size. That's just about what DoD gets. So NASA's visibility is such that people impute to it a level of funding that we just don't have. How many people know the name? Most people know that the Secretary of Defense is Bob Gates. How many people know the name of the Secretary of the Air Force or the Army or the Navy? The Secretary of the Air Force controls more budget authority than does NASA. So our level of visibility is, because of what we do, out of proportion to our actual size within the government, and it's not one of the things that makes life easier. I think it's easy to understand why that's so. If we have a good day, we return the first ever pictures of Saturn, or the first ever landing at the North Pole of Mars, or rovers running around on Mars, or human beings out in spacesuits engaged in the largest human construction project ever done, the International Space Station. If we have a good day, you get to see those things. If we have a bad day, the best it gets is that $1 billion worth of taxpayer hardware is destroyed, and if it's a really bad day, we lose people. And that has happened 3 times in the agency's history, and I've lived through 2 of those as a working engineer and involved in some way or other, and it's not fun. So it's easy to understand why we have the visibility that we do, and it's just a fact of life, but it is something that's different from what most other government agencies have to deal with. So beyond that, then you get into other sets of questions. Things that make running a government entity difficult. For NASA, and possibly for other agencies as well, we have issues with what's the goal? What are we trying to do with the limited funding that is allocated to the space agency? Is it to expand the range of human action and capability? Is it to do more science of the kind that NASA does? Is it to do technology development? Is it to provide full employment at our key centers or certain key regions of the country? Or is it just, do what you do, but don't make waves? Don't do things like retire space shuttles that cost jobs in Florida or upset, the stable pattern of the industry. Or is it just don't fail? Go do whatever you do, but don't fail. Now, these goals aren't all compatible. There isn't any single authority that can prioritize them, not even the president. Certainly the administrator of NASA isn't allowed to do it. And the many and various stakeholders in Congress and the executive branch and the public at large and our scientific and industrial establishments all expect their goal to be on the top of the pile. Now that's an impossible, that's an expectation impossible to realize, but I assure you that it exists in our key stakeholders. And so what emerges is, in some sense, a best mixture of goals, but it varies with who's in charge in the political arena. Now, this is an area where, again, I'm not sure that we have a lot of commonality with other federal entities. NASA is very visible, and so our goals are very visible. I've said in the past that we need to get to a place with our civil space program where every 4 years we don't debate what the purpose of the agency is. We do not debate every 4 years whether we're going to have a Navy and what its purpose is. We don't debate every 4 years whether we're going to have an Air Force and what its purpose is. The FAA knows what it does every year, irrespective of congressional and presidential electoral cycles. At NASA, that's not so. And until and unless we can achieve a greater sense of stability of purpose in the agency, in our agency, our little piece of the federal government, it will be difficult to manage it, because if the goalposts move on timescales that are small relative to the pace of our accomplishment, then you're chasing a very elusive target. Now, I refer to all of this, and I'll have a little bit more discussion on all that. I refer to all this sometimes tongue-in-cheek as democracy in action. It is a byproduct of our form of government, and I think most of us are aware of Winston Churchill's famous quote that, I can't quote it exactly, but words to the effect that democracy is the worst known form of government except for all the others we've tried. But in technical arenas, such as ours, and in many other areas of the federal government, depending on what particular thing you do, there exists an inherent tension between the highly undemocratic autocracy of expertise and the fact that technical problems in whatever field do not yield to majority opinion and don't produce results that are compatible with electoral cycles. So I find it useful in running a federal agency to remember and to remind people from time to time that we live in a representative democracy rather than a direct democracy. The people in our system of government don't decide. The people decide who will decide. Through several levels, through legislative charter and several levels of delegation, the American people have decided that on matters affecting the implementation of civil space policy, NASA officials make the decisions. I think the best compromise between the undemocratic tension that exists between the undemocratic autocracy of expertise and the necessity to have openness and transparency in democratic processes in the spending of federal tax dollars, I think the best compromise results when the leaders and managers, and this is a forum about leadership, the leaders and managers are of demonstrated character and expertise. I think that is the best hope that the lay public can have in any federal entity for the best hope that they can have that their tax dollars will be well and wisely spent. The lay public cannot, or even professionals, highly educated professionals in other fields, really cannot realistically expect to understand in any sort of depth the decisions that go into selecting a particular path for a particular agency. At the FAA, the lay public will not understand, can't be expected to understand why we need to revamp the air traffic control system in the nation. And if they do, what role NASA has in that, and we do have a role. The lay public can't hope to understand whether you approved of or did not approve of the initiation of the Mideast War. The lay public can't hope to critique the battle plan by which the operation would be carried out. The expertise required to conduct an intelligent critique of it doesn't exist in the lay public and can't be expected. What the lay public can expect and should expect is principled decision-making, demonstrated character and demonstrated expertise. And if you don't find that at the heads of federal agencies, then that is a cause for concern. Moving away from the inherent tensions that exist in a democracy when one empowers highly specialized functions to be carried out by people whom you don't understand what they're talking about, I have to call attention to the fact that in general, in most of our federal government, in any given entity, certainly at NASA, there is not enough money to do all that is expected. I mentioned previously that there were many stakeholders having different goals. The fact that there's not enough money to do all that's expected was a consequence of that earlier remark. When major priorities cannot be set and enforced over the long term, the result is that to at least some people, everything seems equally important. If you can't set priorities, then everything is equally important. But there's not enough money to do everything. Now, in a private company, and I have run a private company, that's a much easier problem to solve. You have to manage to a black bottom line or you won't be around long. And there is always more that needs doing than you have the resources to do. And so you have to manage in a responsible fashion, setting priorities and then cutting work where necessary to fit the budget. And you're judged by how well you judged what work really needed to be done and what work could be deferred, because there will always be work in each of those categories. In the government, especially at NASA, I would say, but certainly broadly across the government, those of us who run the agencies generally are not allowed to do that. We get authorization legislation which tells us from the Congress, we have presidential policy which tells us what to do. That policy is debated and discussed in the Congress and either approved or disapproved, but in either case one emerges with authorization legislation telling the various federal agencies what to do. Separately, money is appropriated to execute those activities or not. Now, the amount of money to be appropriated for the activities which the Congress desires that we perform doesn't necessarily match up. Pancakes and the syrup don't necessarily come out even. If they don't come out even, the rational management approach would be to, from a list of priorities, eliminate those from the bottom of the totem pole. Just don't do them if the money is not available. That's not allowed. And so what we end up doing is what goes by the various names of salami slicing or peanut butter spreading, a denigratory term for a good reason, because what one does is to cut money to all programs in a more or less equitable fashion, with equity depending on how our major congressional stakeholders view it. One person's equity is another person's unfair cut. But through whatever process, we manage to spread the money around so that everything keeps going, but at a lesser level of efficiency than the taxpayers really would be entitled to. That's just a fact of life. I think all of us here know that real-world programs have a natural life cycle that they would like to follow depending on the nature and the complexity of the work. In government, we rarely can we rarely can execute any given program on the natural life cycle that it would like to be done. This is, of course, compounded by the allocation of funding on an annual rather than a mission basis. When a new project is approved in industry, a wise board of directors will not approve it until the funding plan is in place and the sourcing of the funds is decided upon, or at least known with high confidence, and the program manager knows he has that allocation to draw upon. Now, woe betide him if he overruns, but if the funding that he was told he can expect doesn't show up, not his problem. It's not that way in government. Geography in government often matters more than mission. The importance of a given thing that we do in NASA, and I know across government, the importance of something that we do is often dependent upon whether or not it resides wholly or in part in the district or the state of a powerful member of Congress. I think as taxpayers we look across the government and we say, well, whatever the priority scheme is by which we wish to allocate priorities to work, zip code is probably not the way that we would like to, is not the filter we would like to use to decide, and yet that is the filter that, at least in part, is used to decide governmental priorities, and it makes management difficult. And then, of course, especially at NASA, because we are so visible and so many people care about what we do, let me just say that we're not lacking a lot of help from those who think that what NASA needs is people with better ideas. It is amazing to me how many people out there in the world at large and in the blogosphere turn out to be untapped space architects with expertise that really needs to be utilized by the nation's space policymakers. I mentioned earlier that the time constant of what we do in technical arenas and certainly in aerospace systems development and operations is incompatible with electoral cycles. That's a fact, and peeling that onion another layer or two down, it has specific implications. The gains and accomplishments from aerospace programs, large aerospace and defense programs, the things that make us look good as a nation, are not realized by those who invest the political capital to start them, unless they continue to get elected. And that's not a bet that most politicians can accept. The losses, when we do something wrong, the losses accrue to those who weren't responsible for the decisions in the first place. So if it turns out that an Air Force tanker procurement of a certain type creates a lot of dissension, or if it turns out that a large NASA mission slips or fails entirely, that happens on the watch of someone who really probably didn't have much to do with going down that path in the first place. That, of course, it makes the accountability and responsibility of decision-making that one would like to have in the system, it strains it at the very least and sometimes obviates it entirely. I mentioned earlier that in a political system such as we have, the necessary constancy of purpose that would need to be across electoral cycles is very hard to sustain. It's very hard to sustain. Most people look back, for example, on Apollo, even if you're not a space geek like I am, you look back on Apollo and say clearly one of humankind's great accomplishments and certainly a pinnacle of accomplishment by the United States of America. Not many people know that budgets for Apollo started declining in 1966 because of pressures from the Vietnam War and the desire to have, the phrase at the time I well remember, and some of you are old enough to remember, was guns and butter. We would have both, right? Well, write and let me know how that works out for you. It didn't work out real well then. I can't imagine it would ever work out. But Apollo funding started declining in 1966, only 5 years after President Kennedy declared and got a major national commitment to do the job. So in fact, the last 3 Apollo missions for which the hardware had been bought, okay, were canceled by President Nixon in the late 60s. Ostensibly, certainly in part for funding reasons. So even during something which we regard as a halcyon time for the space program and one of the nations and the world's greatest accomplishments, even during that time, to sustain a fixed purpose for more than 5 years proved undoable. Proved undoable. As a consequence, we spent, in the dollars of the time, they don't mean much now, so I'll use percentages, we spent 80% of our money in Apollo. This nation spent the money that it spent on Apollo, 80% of it was spent developing a capability that the world had never seen before. 20% of the money was spent using the capability, and then it was thrown away. I can't think of another major development for which such a thing would be true. The nation has spent uncounted billions developing aircraft carrier technology to the point where something that looks damn near impossible is almost routine. But we didn't develop aircraft carriers and then throw them all away after we figured out how to do it. I can't think of another major thing that we have treated like we have treated our space enterprise. In part, mostly because the necessary constancy of purpose for such long-term endeavors is very difficult to sustain in a political system. We are even having difficulty after the loss of Shuttle Columbia in '03. The executive branch, the legislative branch, receiving Admiral Gaiman's report on the failure of Columbia, absolutely propounded the goal that we would sustain the purpose necessary to retire the space shuttle and build a new system. And if you read yesterday's Wall Street Journal, people today are questioning whether NASA is building the right new system and whether we want to at all. Well, you know, those questions were all settled several years ago, right? I mean, there's no such thing as a settled question in government. Efficient management requires discretionary authority, no matter what the institution, private or public. Efficient management requires discretionary authority that is not usually granted to government managers. Now, there are exceptions, and they stand out in our history. They're the things that people make movies and write books about. The Manhattan Project, you know, under General Groves and Dr. Oppenheimer. The ICBM project under folks like Benny Schriever, who I'm fortunate to have claimed him as one of my mentors. In the submarine ballistic missile world, Admiral Red Rayborn. Apollo, I've mentioned, under leaders like Jim Webb, the NASA administrator at the time, Bob Gilruth at Johnson Space Center, Werner von Braun, a name that everyone knows. The F-117 fighter development program, 6 years from a sketch on a piece of paper to delivery of an operational wing, an entirely new stealth technology, something that President Carter could stand up and brag about in a State of the Union address. An extraordinarily impressive accomplishment. When we really care enough to lift the constraints on the discretionary authority that we give government managers, government can be every bit as efficient as private industry. But usually we do not feel, as a nation and as a culture, usually we do not feel threatened enough to provide such discretion. Usually we do not send a commanding general like Dwight Eisenhower direction to cross the English Channel, invade the heartland of Europe, and free Europe from Nazi oppression. Not quoting quite exactly, but those were Eisenhower's orders in concerning the D-Day invasion. We don't do that enough. And absent a crisis, business as usual prevails. With all the churn that you see in government processes and that this whole seminar is devoted to discussing. In government, we can hire the best people in the world because they're driven by a sense of mission. We have a Nobel Prize winner working at NASA. President-elect Obama just announced another Nobel Prize winner to run the Department of Energy. I mean, what a great choice. We can get the best in the world, but we can't fire even the very worst. That's a bit of an exaggeration. If I spend 2 years at it and work hard, I can fire the very worst. Even among the very best, we have the problems that accrue to having a volunteer labor force. Anybody who you would want to keep at NASA or in any other federal entity can make a lot more money doing almost anything else. Okay, I could literally make more money retiring than I make working for NASA. So I'm working for free. That means in any volunteer organization, people really want to do only what they want to do. They're not there because it's the only job they can get, because they have to have it. They're there because of a sense of mission, their mission. And it can be very difficult to get everybody pulling on the oar in the same direction. Even very low-level folks, in terms of the organizational hierarchy, they may have extraordinarily high organizational value, but they may not be at a high management level. But even low-level folks at our federal centers throughout the land can have direct access to local congressional delegations or senatorial delegations. And I mean, they may be friends with these folks. Even congressmen have friends. And so lower level folks in the hierarchy are entirely free to promulgate policy agendas directly to legislators or executive branch officials that are in conflict with not only maybe agency policy, but written down legislative policy for the agency at large. And if a given local person has the right connection, those policies can be undermined or even reversed without substantive public debate. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes in the larger scheme of things, that's good. I happen to believe that Senator Mikulski pushing through the legislation that directed NASA to do yet another Hubble repair mission was a good thing for the nation. But in fact, that ran against agency policy at that time. So I'm not saying that it's an unmitigated bad thing. It can be good, selectively, but it certainly makes management difficult. The procurement system in federal service is designed to be fair. Above all else, it is designed to be fair. It is designed to be open. It is designed to be impartial. It is not designed to provide the best value, and it in fact is designed to block the discretion of senior managers in selecting sources rather than to take advantage of it. When I ran a company, I made a decision in about a week's time with all necessary technical input to upgrade a particular chip in our standard commercial GPS receiver from a 3rd generation to a 4th generation chip, and selected, in this case, Motorola rather than Intel. And I didn't have anybody from the congressional delegation representing Intel coming and complaining to me that I was unfair. Okay, I mean, fairness is not a concept in business. Fair is what, you know, I was judged by my board of directors on the efficacy of the decision as it affected the company's bottom line, not its fairness to Motorola and Intel. That doesn't happen in government, again, unless we're in a crisis mode. Finally, we have a lot of external review, I would say, on inappropriate topics. Let me just give you a few of the people who can claim a right of review over NASA and make it stick. We have the Government Accounting Office, the Inspector General, the National Research Commission, or Council, sorry, the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine. Capitol Hill, the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and many more. And then there are numerous ad hoc groups, scientific organizations and such, who claim the right of review over NASA's decisions and actions. None of those people have the same goals or agenda in mind, and certainly we don't control them. They get to say what they want to say. consensus is just not possible. There are too many voices, too many agendas. Now, my belief is, and what I teach and what I try to practice, is that management consists, at any level, of specifying to those below you what you want done and reviewing how well it has been done. You do not tell those whom you manage how to do something. If you have to tell them how to do something, you need different people. So in government, the what is policy formulated by presidents and their cabinet officers and other advisors, and finally decided by the legislature. That's how our democracy works. The what is policy, and that is determined by policymakers in the executive and legislative branches. The how is executed by a vast network of federal entities. So when review is done, in my mind, it ought to concentrate on how well we're implementing what we were told to implement. But most people in all of these various three-letter organizations whom I've mentioned, at least as regards NASA, don't do that. Most of them are in fact not appropriately qualified to review how well we've done. But what they really, and it isn't even what they want to do, and that's the key point. What they want to do is to have a stake in setting what was done. So their actual desire is to set or to create or to alter policy from the position that they hold on a congressional staff, executive branch staff, some particular entity like the Government Accounting Office or the OMB or whatever. So you have a continual influence by unelected and in general unappointed staff on what is done, what is to be done with federal tax dollars, and one can't, as an agency head or high management official, one can't fight every battle. There are just too many of them and not enough of you. So again, you have to prioritize. So it often puts NASA in the middle between executive branch staff, congressional staff, National Academy, and innumerable other entities. NASA managers are often in the middle because each of those entities has something different that they want done, not necessarily compatible with legislation and not necessarily compatible with ongoing programs. Even presidents and senators and congressmen who know and agree on what they want done don't have the time to control all of the actions taken by their staff in their name. It was Eisenhower who famously said, "I don't understand, and when I was in the Army, I gave an order, something would happen. In the White House, I give an order and nothing happens." Ike was not the first president to discover that and will not be the last. But as an agency head, that fact certainly makes life difficult. Finally, I'll just conclude by saying that at NASA we do have today, in these days, a special concern. We lost Columbia Shuttle in 2003. It's a loss of billions of dollars of consequential damages, direct and indirect, and 7 people in the most highly public way possible. And since then, and in fact directly attributable to that, one can see in the print media and the internet media today that NASA simply is not trusted fully again yet to make the kinds of choices that agencies need to make to carry out their business. There's an awful lot of over-the-shoulder, an awful lot of review. I'm not saying that I don't understand it. I do understand it. But it is a fact, and it makes life difficult, at least for NASA these days. But as a practical matter, the design choices of NASA or the technical choices of any federal agency can't effectively be subjected to continual public referenda or vetting by industrial contractors who have their own self-interest in mind, or approval or disapproval by the various non-accountable staff that I've mentioned. As a practical matter, you just can't run anything this way. Things grind to a halt. So for our agency, and I would submit that this holds true for any agency when it gets in trouble for whatever reason, we need to remind ourselves as citizens from time to time that the agency has to enjoy, one way or another, the confidence of the President and the Congress and the public at large if it's to do its job at all. We can't guarantee success, but we can find ways to guarantee failure. And one of them is to operate in a mode that subjects the agency's decisions to continual churn and continual vetting until everyone agrees that the right things are being done. Everyone will not agree, and in general, the expertise to hold a qualified opinion doesn't exist. So that's a problem. We'll work our way out of it. It occurred after the Apollo fire in 1967, after the loss of Challenger in 1986, and we are still in the middle of it in 2008 after the loss of Columbia in 2003. So I mentioned that. Today it's applicable to NASA, but how many jokes have you seen about FEMA after Katrina, right? FEMA is not the incompetent entity that the print media would have you believe. But there will be FEMA jokes for a long time. So these are some of the problems that I see in running a federal agency. I've tried to leave some time for questions. Let's go to those. Thanks.
My name's Frank Keegan. I work for the Baltimore Examiner. Do you have the technology to disguise NASA as a failing financial institution?
No. NASA's actually executing pretty well these days. So I certainly wouldn't mind, though, if a couple of stray $1 billion wandered into our front door. Connie?
Conrad Grant from the Applied Physics Lab. You're facing a real transition right now with the new administration.
Right.
How do you create the imperative, Mike, to take the momentum that you've done under the new strategy forward through this transition? How are you going to do that?
Well, I can't. I mean, that's a good question. I can make the case for why I can make and have made the case for why I think that the strategy, that the path that NASA is on, the policy, the strategy, the what to do, not the how to do, I can make the case that that is the best one, and I have tried to do so. One measure I think that I take particular pleasure in observing is that in '05, a Republican-led Congress wrote this strategy down and codified it into law in our '05 Authorization Act, and then 3 years later in '08, a Democratic Congress supported it again and in fact enhanced it for us. So 2 successive Congresses have written extraordinarily similar legislation telling NASA what to do, one Republican-led and one Democratic-led. So right now, we at NASA enjoy tremendous bipartisan support in the Congress. For the last 2 years, I've had the Congress trying to give me more money than the President will accept. I can't remember when that happened before. So I think in the legislature we have a very broad and very deep agreement that we're on the right path for what to do. And I try to make that case. But as always, I mean, we hold elections so that decisions can be made. And the President-elect and his team have every right and expectation of being able to review the bidding and decide if they want to propose something different to the Congress. So all I can do, and what I do, is to make the case that I think we're on the right path.
Over here?
John Wakeman, T. Rowe Price. I'm curious, the mission that you've articulated for the country and the President Bush has articulated, can you comment on the gap that exists with the shuttle program and the new program in terms of, as a citizen of the United States, put that in some perspective for us in terms of what can we really do to minimize the gap? We hear a lot about it, but in terms of extending the shuttle and moving the other one forward, realistically from a money perspective and a technology perspective, what can we do about that?
Okay, that's a good question. I get it a lot. I have been calling attention to the gap between shuttle retirement and deployment of our replacement systems, Ares and Orion, we call them. Been calling attention to that for 3.5 years and more. And to answer your question, what can be done about it? The first part of your question is, what do I think about it? I don't like it. We've had similar gaps in space flight access capability before, but we never had a $50+ billion space station in need of logistics support and crew rotations and things like that riding on the outcome. So the overarching need is a very practical one. We have spent way too much time and way too much money developing a space station, in part because of some of these processes I mentioned, but we have it, and we ought to utilize it, and we need to take care of it and protect it and enhance it. And without continuity in our spaceflight capability, we can't guarantee to do that. Now, our current strategy is to buy rides from Russia, which I find unseemly in the extreme, and it's a dependency. I love having the Russians as partners on our space station. I think that is absolutely to the good. I like them. I like my Russian colleagues. They're great engineers. But I want partners. I don't want a hostage situation. So I don't like it. Now, what can be done about it? On a fixed dollar budget such as we have today, the answer is nothing. We have the gap in service that we have as a matter of fiscal constraints, not technology. If one chose to do it, additional money could be appropriated to extend the shuttle. We could fly it carefully for a few more years, a couple times a year, and greatly mitigate our dependence upon Russia. And certainly we could provide for the logistics support to the station while we were building replacement systems. That would take about $3 billion a year, round numbers, to continue flying the shuttle. Without the additional appropriation, you don't close the gap, you just move it out in time. On constant dollars, we simply don't do the work on the replacement systems because we're spending the money flying the shuttle. I don't think that's a wise move. I'm in print on that. I just think from an engineering perspective, that's stupid. I'm not willing to sacrifice our future plans to move the gap. So on constant dollars, it can't be fixed. The other thing that could be done is, at this point, it would still be possible with some additional funding to accelerate the development of our replacement systems by a year or so at this point. So instead of delivering them in 2015, assuming we get future funding that has been in constant dollars, instead of delivering them in 2015, we could deliver them in 2014 or even late 2013 if the money were made available. That's a few extra $1 billion total, not a few billion a year. It takes a few billion a year to continue to fly the shuttle. It would take a few $1 billion total to accelerate the Ares and Orion replacement systems. So all of the solutions, when you say what can be done about it, well, to be honest with you, I think we've put in place the best constant dollar solution to the problem that can be done. So solutions that would be better than this need more money. I leave it to you to judge whether the political process will produce that.
There's one here.
Mr. Griffin, my name is Asif Khan, and I'm a student at Carey Business School as well as work for Lockheed Martin Corporation. The question I have is basically based on some of your items that you presented, accountability, responsibility. A number of agencies have been asked to implement national performance appraisal systems. Some of the agencies that I support within the organization to bring accountability, responsibility within the organization. Are you aware of that? Is NASA also looking at that system?
I don't know what specific system we're looking at.
Well,
We
it's
certainly
more to bring good business practices within the organization to hold people accountable within the organization.
We certainly are doing that. We have performance appraisals every year. I just got done doing those for our upper level team, and I think in terms of our upper level team, they certainly feel accountable and responsible. The point that I was trying to make earlier is that performance appraisal systems that produce bad performance appraisals for the employees that one would like to get rid of have a fairly strict script that one has to follow, and it takes a couple of years to work through it, and an awful lot of labor by the manager, and often results in a lawsuit. And so the line of least resistance for most government managers who wish to get anything else done is to just let that person sit there and go work some other problem. It's not that we don't have a performance appraisal system, it's that the civil service protections that exist make it extremely cumbersome if one wishes to use it in a negative manner.
Sir, my understanding was this new system was supposed to address all these issues you're talking about, so I'm just curious if...
I believe you may be speaking about Department of Defense.
Right.
They have different rules than we do.
Okay, so it's not...
It's not across the government.
Okay.
I think there was a question over here.
Molly.
Yes, Molly McCauley with Hopkins and RFF. Administrator Griffin, thanks very much for coming up this early to join us. I appreciated your comments. You spoke a great deal about the challenges of leading within the federal government system and the U.S. Would you say a word or two about what it means to lead internationally, especially with our space program, and the challenges of knowing when to cooperate or when to compete?
That's a great question. One of the core values that I think the civil space program brings to our nation is leadership in the world of civilized nations, high-tech nations, in an activity that everywhere you go, people love. I am always astounded when I travel internationally at the reception that I get, just because I'm the head of NASA at this period of time. People love spaceflight in all its forms. And every nation, we're partnering with 15 other nations on the space station. Some have small pieces, some have really big pieces. And something over 60% of all of our science missions are done with international cooperation. People around the world who reach a certain technological level want to be part of this. And because of our earlier investment in Apollo and in other military space technologies, we still have a lead over all others in our capability to do these things, and so we are able to initiate things that others like to do from a position of leadership. Now that lead is evaporating, but we still have it at this point. What does that bring us? To me, as a strategic power, we, the United States, often have to do things that make other people unhappy with us. And one of the best things that I think we can do as a nation is to look for things which are not like that. Look for things that we can do with other nations that they are happy about. It is tremendously helpful to have offsetting things of that type. The other benefit that we get out of it is we get access to their thinking and their viewpoints and their culture at the leadership level. The people who run high technology enterprises in other countries are those countries' leaders. The president of India, the most recent former president of India, was an aerospace engineer who used to run the Indian Space Research Organization. The president of Germany, Chancellor of Germany, Mrs. Merkel, is a physicist. When we do these kinds of activities, we are interacting with the leadership or later leadership of nations that are important to us. So there are many reasons to do these international programs, and I think we do them quite well. But in order to have leadership, we have to invest. People don't like us enough that they want to partner with us and drag us along. That's not going to happen. So we have to invest in keeping our space program the best in the world if we expect to do cooperative programs from a position of leadership. Am I answering, Molly? Am I answering your question?
What about competition?
Well, competition's good too. We see that in the business world all the time, right? Companies form teams to compete for a given job, and then they compete with others on other jobs, and somehow they're able to sort it out. And it keeps people sharper. There is value to collaboration, and there is value to competition. And you know, right now, the French, the European launch vehicle company, Arianespace, is kicking our butt in terms of the commercial market for putting commercial communication satellites in orbit. They now have the lion's share of the commercial space transportation market in the world. They've earned it. They've invested for decades to get it. But they now are a world strategic power in commercial launch services, something that the United States used to have over 90% of the traffic for. If we want it back, we're going to have to invest. We need to decide if that matters to us. But there is value to competition, because without that competition, frankly, we would have no one to show us up. We need that. We need that. You know, we as Americans, all of us in this room inherited a world that was purchased for us by, in my case, our parents, in some of your cases it may be our grandparents. It was purchased for us by those who prevailed in World War II. We came out of World War II having lost 500,000 people against 55 million people dead around the world, and the industrial base of even the winners decimated. The winners were decimated elsewhere around the world, and the United States was essentially untouched in any practical sense in comparison to all others. So we came out of World War II as the undisputed world leader, and we've been living off of that now for 60 plus years. And most people born today and all policymakers alive today believe that that's a birthright, that it comes with your passport. And they don't understand that it's not in our DNA. We're not smarter than everybody else. We aren't better than everybody else. And it's not a natural state of affairs that where the world we grew up in was earned for us by our parents. We have not chosen to invest in the way that they invested, and those decisions will have consequences, which we will see, and then we will have decisions to make as to whether or not we want to get it back.